So for today's website, we're going to be reviewing the Craft Yarn Council's website, craftyarncouncil.com, as you can see in the address bar, and we'll be putting it in the show notes as well. I visit this site quite often to look at the standards. There's a lot of standards that the Craft Yarn Council has helped to facilitate, and that can be found here under the standards drop-down. You can see that they have general standards, crochet standards, and knit standards. We're going to be looking at just a couple of these, and one of those is the standard yarn weight system. I'd like to share that with you now. This is a very useful tool for you as a knitter. The Craft Yarn Council made a commitment in recent years to simplify this for us. And what I mean by that is they've created these symbols, these little yarn symbols, with the numbers in between them, everything from 0 to 7. And then they've called these lace, superfine, fine, light, medium, bulky, super bulky, and jumbo. So these are true descriptions of the yarn. This is to say that a lot of the names that we've called yarns in the past, anywhere from fingering to sock to sport to DK to worsted, these have been terms that we used, but they can be misnomers too, because sock yarn really could be super fine yarn, or you could make sock yarn out of sport yarn or DK or worsted. So you can make socks out of any of this type. So just saying sock yarn didn't quite work. Also, fingering yarn could be crochet thread or sport. If you tried to size anything with a light worsted over worsted, if it called for worsted and you used light worsted, then the piece you're making is going to be considerably smaller. So there are a lot of things that descriptors that didn't work, and they've used these symbols to help simplify that for us. Another way you can determine that is through the gauge range, and that says stockinette stitch to 4 inches. That would be typically also in pattern. So if you're knitting garter stitch or any other thing in pattern, this might, where there's just knit stitches or purl stitches, knit and purl, because they should use about the same. But stockinette stitch uses very standard, because you knit all on one side and you purl on the other, so you're not going back and forth like in ribbing. So I wouldn't use this standard for ribbing, but in a gauge swatch, you want to make sure you're knitting a 6 by 6 inch or 7 by 7 inch swatch, and then measuring the interior 4 inches. The interior 4 inches, and I also recommend to wash and block it, meaning dry it, because you don't know how the yarn's going to behave. But this is one way to determine that, what size that is. And how do you get that? Well, by knitting on these recommended needle sizes. These are the US sizes, 000 to 17 or even larger. These are the millimeter sizes. Those are very true, but used mostly in European sizes, although a lot of needle companies are going to use both. They'll use the US and the millimeter to cover that. Some just use the millimeter, FYI. I will always give you the US size and the millimeter size. They also have crochet gauge and hook and metric and hook and US sizes. But this is a great way to understand the yarn weight system. And you can see there's a lot to memorize, so I go back to it quite often so I don't have to. Another thing I'd like to show you here is, under general, is the wraps per inch. Now this is typically a term used by weavers, but as a knitter, this is indispensable, knowing the wraps per inch. And that is used majorly in my, what we'll discuss on this channel, as for substituting yarn. So as you're substituting yarn, you can use the wraps per inch by yarn weight to determine what you're using. So if you if there's a medium yarn and you know that it has a wraps per inch of 9 to 12, and you want to substitute a yarn, but it actually only has 6 to 9, then you know that that might be too thick. Or if it has 11 to 15 wraps per inch, and you want to substitute it for a 9 to 12, this is really going to help you. And we're going to talk about wraps per inch later on in the episodes, but I wanted to introduce it to you now. Excuse me. The other thing we can see here are the knitting abbreviations. These is a master list of the U.S. English abbreviations. It gives you the code and what it means, or the code and what to do. But this is a really good use if you find a term in a pattern and you don't really know what it is. You can come here, and they should have it here. There's also, if you kind of see a term or a notation in a pattern and you're not quite sure what it means, here it gives you the term and what you do when you see it. But these are just a few of the many areas that the Craft Yarn Council's website has. Lots of education. They have ways to get involved, charities, guilds and groups, I Love Yarn Day that they host around the country. There's wellness resources about the Craft Yarn Council. But I invite you to visit the Craft Yarn Council site and see all it has to offer. And you can even log in, create an account. It's free. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of WebSight.